today changes my whole entire life.
Welcome to Gritability, a podcast about the power of perseverance, overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to attain the life of your dreams. I'm your podcast host, Hector Clausen, and with me today, although not in the studio, is the beautiful and ever radiant Ro Clausen.
Hi, everybody.
What up? What up?
And Hector Bravo, our guest today. Man, it is great to have you here. We've talked a lot about our story, Ro and I, and all of the challenges that we faced over the roughly 11 years that we maintained a relationship while I was in prison. And man, the different situations that we had to deal with.
I bet.
Yeah, incredible. You're someone who knows, who understands the system because of your background. Can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background?
Yeah. First, I wanted to thank you guys for having me on here. As you guys stated earlier, I kind of been doing my rounds and whatnot. My name's Hector Bravo. In December, so like 4 or 5 months ago, I resigned from the California Department of Corrections. I did a total of 16 years. People kind of trip out when I say I did a total of 16. And I made it up to the rank of lieutenant. Getting exposed to the rank of lieutenant, I saw a lot of stuff that I did not agree with personally, ethically, morally, up at the top above me. Having a 4-year-old daughter, it kind of put things in perspective. Hey, what am I going to do? Chase this money or raise a family, in an honorable way?
Wow. All right, man. Coming from, having served over 20 years in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I served roughly 3.5 before that, was in and out of county jails. So I've been in every different type of facility. You having worked in those facilities, man, I'm curious to hear, kind of what your experience was on the other side of that, how you got into it. I'm sure you've got plenty of stories. I know I've got a ton of stories of the things that I saw on the inside. But really what our podcast is about is, it's about overcoming challenges and doing those difficult things on a regular basis, as you said, because, to live with a certain level of integrity, it defines who you are by what we do. And I have a feeling that, there's some experiences from your past that ultimately defined who you were in that role. And I'm hoping you could tell us a little bit about those.
For sure, yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. Prior to becoming a correctional officer, I was in the Army, the United States Army. I enlisted at the age of 17.
Wow.
I saw the Twin Towers go down in the year 2001, and by July of 2002, I was on my way to Fort Benning, Georgia, home of the infantry. And we were already in Afghanistan in war, and there was talks about going into Iraq. Saddam Hussein, weapons of mass destruction. We needed to liberate the people. So, being young, dumb, and full of testosterone, that's where I ended up in the year of 2004 for 13 months in Iraq, combat every day.
Wow. I can't imagine what that must have been like. I remember seeing it on the news. It's interesting. You bring up 9/11. Most people recall where they were on that day, depending on how old they are. Clearly, it had the impact of, changing the trajectory of your life, got you to enlist. I had a family member, a cousin, same thing. And I remember how he was petrified going off to boot camp, right? He's like, man, what did I get myself into? Ultimately became a decorated soldier, armed service member. And I remember thinking to myself, because I was already in prison, and watching the response that our country had and the admiration I had for others, who chose to put their lives on the line. So I have a great deal of respect for you and for anyone else who, has similarly served our country in that way. That's an amazing foundation to set, because the military, depending on when you enlist, I mean, it's not always going to be the same level of sacrifice, right? Like you knew that you were going into war. Like we that's where the country was at that time. So that's a different level of courage, man. And I can imagine that there were, some really tough times being over there in the desert.
Yeah, you're right. It's a different time. We even get a little extra medal for serving in the time, or a ribbon for serving in time of war. I think it's like the national defense. I don't know. I can't remember. It's, goes on the uniform, meaning that you joined in a time of war. And I've spoken to other people since I've been out, and they regretted not going to war in their time frame, right? Because it's kind of all luck of the draw. But I tell them, nah, you're better off. You're better off, because what I was wanting, I got it, and worse. It wasn't what I had expected. So it was extra.
Well, I'll say this. I know throughout the many years that I was in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I watched many of the officers come in who had served previously and who had seen action, who had been to war. And there was a clear difference in those officers compared to others who didn't have that background. And in my opinion, I believe that it's all of our life experiences that give us a level of perspective. And the more challenges we've been through, the greater we can appreciate the present moment, no matter what it is that we're going through. So I can imagine, that shaped you, obviously. And when you decided to get into corrections, kind of what inspired you to take that direction?
So it did shape me in the form of, I got a lot of action under my belt. I'm not bragging or boasting. I'm just speaking facts. What I had in my system, I got it out, so to say. Plus I had friends that were killed over there, brothers that were killed over there. So I learned the ultimate definition of sacrifice, leadership. They physically showed me what it takes to be, courageous, loyal, honorable, duty, selfless service. So going into corrections, my father was a correctional officer at the same prison that I had ended up. So he joined in 1993.
Okay. And I saw a lot of that too over the years, generational. And the reality is, man, we build prisons generally in, towns where those cities or towns become dependent on that prison as an industry, right, to provide jobs and, support that local community. So I watched plenty of generations. Remember, I was there over 20 years. So I saw that happen frequently enough. And, that can give you a good life, right?
Well, yeah, you're right. 20 years is a long time. So like observing my father and bringing home the money, plus it is a small town, was a small town, 2 prisons there, state prisons. You have Calapat and Centinela. So everybody that was a CO or correctional officer, they had the big lifted trucks. They had the big homes. They had the big screen TVs. And it was, as a youngster, you see that and you're like, okay, that's what I want to provide. But that was what do you want to say? Like a motivating factor, of course, my mindset would change throughout the years. So yeah, that was, seeing all the tantalizing, benefits and health insurance and money was the incentive.
Sure. Those are big incentives, man. Definitely. So what was it that, started to shift your thinking? Because you can go one of two ways, right? Like some people make corrections like that's it. That's
right.
Becomes their life. And others decide, like yourself, you know what? I've had enough of this. I need to get out of here. I need to go do something different. And I'm curious what it was that, and I don't know if it was one thing in particular, a number of things that you saw change over the years. Like, how did that progression or transformation take place?
In the beginning, I came in the department in 2006. It was a 16-week academy in Stockton, California. We actually stayed in an old female prison that was like run down or closed down. So I had to sleep in the cells. And
Really?
yeah, man, it was.
Man, listen, I've been talking about this for years,
For
saying that
years.
that's the type of training that there
Oh,
should be.
really?
Absolutely. Well, this is the first time I've ever heard of officers being trained in that way, having to actually sleep in the cells.
Well, I kind of forgot to mention that when I came back from Iraq, I was running amok for a whole year, going wild, and I ended up in jail for a week for a beer run. So I actually got a taste of jail, incarceration prior to becoming a CO.
How did you leave that part out?
I did not leave it out on the background because of the background investigator like, hey, whoa, man, it says right here a couple months you were in jail. I'm like, hey, sir, I could explain all of it. And I gave my little spiel, and he's like, you know, you look like a good kid. I'm going to give you a chance. And the guy gave me a chance.
You're literally Adam's ideal correctional officer with military background, with the personal experience being incarcerated at certain points, and then also with what was the other one
The
that you said?
training.
Oh, with the training, because it develops that empathy. He's been saying all
Yeah.
of this for years.
Yeah. Empathy. It's huge. And people even say some of the best street cops come from like, you know, the hood or people that were raised in the streets because they understand the culture and how to maneuver.
Yeah, but I'm also really curious if the corruption, if you saw that corruption from the very beginning, or if you maybe your eyes were open to it throughout a certain amount of time. Like, were you disillusioned? Was it there all along? Did it get worse throughout the years?
It's like the closer you are to the ground fighting, the closer you are to the trenches, the lesser you don't see the bigger picture, right?
Good
So
analogy.
same thing as being in the army. If you don't get to see what the politicians are really doing up at the top. You're fighting. So personally, I'm comfortable in that environment. The trenches part, the fighting part, the boots on the ground part. I operate best in that environment. And it seems like when I got up and saw the bigger picture, I'm like, oh, no way, get me out of here now.
Yeah. So I think I didn't let you answer Adam's question either. Was there something specific that you're like, all right, I'm done now? Or was it just the culmination of all of it throughout the years?
No, it was towards the end. It was towards the end of the 16-year career. The beginning first years were cool. What I would imagine prison to be at prison. Riots, stabbings, fighting. And I say that's cool, and it's probably not cool, right? But as a young kid, right? Like, if you want to talk about how my mindset was at the time and what I was getting a lot of money, you know, they were not higher ups, were not scrutinizing us and throwing us under their bus for personal gain and personal agendas. And I saw as the years progressed, everything, laws changed in California. Just it got wild. So when I promoted a sergeant, you know, I was working under now the lieutenant and the captains. It was adding up to me over a period of time that they were not following policy and procedure, right? The book, the manual of how that we get. And I'm not saying I'm a by the book type of guy, but you know, the last thing they are going to do is go around and try to blame us for a problem that they created.
I want to back up for just a second because you talked about, you know, as a young man coming home from war,
Yeah.
taking a job in a prison where sometimes, you know, prisons turn into a battleground, right? I'm
Yep.
sure you saw plenty of that. You mentioned the riots.
Yep.
And a lot of times that's what people want to hear about. They want to hear about, you know, that side of prison. That's not something that we usually get into, but I do want to talk about your experience in, you know, feeling comfortable in that environment. Tell us a little bit about that, what your mindset was and what that experience was like and how you were attracted to that.
So it's like I came from Iraq, where I was watching car bombs, you know, they I'm not trying to say too much in front of the child there, but it did a lot of damage to like a lot of individuals, right? So I saw the worst. So I don't know where my PTSD stopped with Iraq and started with the department, but I didn't come in like with a, you know, trying to be hard or trying to force myself or thinking that the badge made me somebody. I wasn't. I came in like, hey, I got a job to do, right? Not by the book. I was never like, I wasn't that cop, that the one that nobody likes, that doing too much, right? I wasn't trying to prove anything, but I did get tested. I did get tested. But imagine that's how a prison goes with the inmate population. They want to see what you're about.
Tell me about that. How did you get tested?
And really quick, I'm going to interrupt. I'm wearing headphones, so be as graphic as you want.
Oh,
He can't
okay.
hear. Yeah,
Well,
and for everybody that's listening and not watching, the reason that I'm home is because our babysitter canceled. That's what we're referring to.
it's all good. It's all good.
Super.
Yeah,
bummer.
yeah. So I've seen all the devastation, right? Car bombs, pieces of people everywhere, man, right into it. And I got tested going into the department. Like, they'll test you small. Hey, can I get a plastic bag? Can I get rubber bands? Can I get this? Can I get that? And aside from that, they'll test you by straight up calling you the B word and see how you act. And well, at that time, right, this was not allowed, but I would take off my belt. This was not allowed at all. Shouldn't be done then, shouldn't be done now at all, right? And I'm saying that as a former employee and supervisor. And technically, it's like they're calling you out to a fight. And that's kind of at that time what was kind of the not protocol, but like that's how you earned respect.
Mm-hmm. No, I get it. Believe me. I watched things change dramatically over the years.
Yeah.
And some people hearing that would be like, oh my God, like that's not how prisons are supposed to operate by the book, right? I know different.
Right.
My experience was different. Like what you're talking about develops a different level of respect.
Right.
And unfortunately, sometimes that's what's needed in those environments to develop a relationship, right? Like I've seen officers take somebody, you know, in a room and take off the belt and say, let's go.
Right.
And after that, there was a very clear understanding and a different level of relationship developed where things were smooth from that point forward, right?
Maybe even a handshake. Yeah, for
exactly.
Sure. But yeah, I've even had people, you know, since coming out on YouTube, like initially when people didn't have an idea about me, they're like, hey, you're a CO, you should be behaving yourself better than, you should be holding yourself to a higher standard than the inmate. And talking to a guy that was actually incarcerated at the prison, he's like, nah, man, you guys are in there just like us, and violence earns you respect in there as far as like your reputation. So
well,
I get it, you get it.
Yeah, well put. And the unfortunate reality is, you know, people can speak from the bubbles that they live in.
Yeah.
And we live in a society that is generally very distant, has become soft, and with no understanding of what it takes to live in that environment.
Right.
And there are some benefits. I've spoken about at length. For me, there was a lot of good that came out of me being in prison. I had no structure. I had no, no direction. Like being in there in that confined environment forced me to deal with who I was, make some decisions about how I was going to live, and figure out how to interact with people. Now, it wasn't always the best experience, but I learned from it. Right. And I believe that, you know, the person I am today is the result of overcoming all those challenges. So those experiences obviously helped you to develop sense of self, a reputation in there. You talked about starting to move up the ranks. How did you get pegged for leadership and then start moving up?
So the thought process initially was to be a correctional officer only, for 28 years. 28 years because that's the time that I had to turn 50. The age of 50 was a retirement age. I came in at 22. So after a few years, the sergeants would come up to me and be like, "Hey, you should put in your application for a sergeant. You should try to become a sergeant." And I'm like, "I don't know, man. I don't know. That's not the plan." Then the other OG officers, the one that have been in for 20 years, 25 years, were like, "Hey, Hector, you should put in for sergeant because we regret not putting in for sergeant when we were younger. And now it's too late for us. And since you're brand new and you have nothing coming, you might as well promote to sergeant now and have nothing coming there." And ultimately I caved in at the 8-year mark. So which is cool because I did 8 years as an officer, which now it is extremely rare. They be promoting after 2 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of quick. And,
It's not cool because they don't know the job.
Exactly. So anyways, you start moving up, and with those leadership positions, you start to see things differently. What is it that starts, raising questions for you about being there, about what you're doing?
All right. So initially at the sergeant, like in a broad thing, is getting blamed for stuff that is not my fault or the fault of the officers. So that was like a flag, like, wait a minute. And people can, they talk about any job being like that. Like, oh, hey, you go work at Staples, you go work at McDonald's, you're going to have a bad boss that does bad things and or is a poor leader. And I've come to the realization, especially recently, like, yeah, but at those jobs, ain't nobody's life in jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
Not the inmate's life, not our lives. And that to me was a game changer, the immense stress and the hypertension, the heart racing. So that was the initial big red flag. Like, hey, you are blaming us for stuff that is not our fault. Right. And it wasn't until I promoted to lieutenant that I really got to see what was what and who was who. Personally.
Yeah, I was going to say the higher up you get, the more you get to see behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Well, throughout the years, Ro had, a front row seat for all of this. Part of it was through me sharing. I will say this, as a guy with 213 years, I was one of those high profile inmates. You know how that goes. So I was under a lot of scrutiny, especially somewhat ironically, when I moved down to a medium, which is still high security.
Right.
There's even more attention. When I was at the USP, everybody had life sentences, right? And we had, world-renowned gangsters and spies and all sorts of people where that attention was kind of spread out. So at a medium, there was a lot more. And some of that followed us, into our relationship, my phone calls, emails, all of that closely scrutinized. And when she would come up, that experience wasn't always positive because, that sometimes the personal, comes into the job. And unfortunately, she had to deal with that occasionally.
Totally understand. I worked visiting, visitation where the family members come, the spouses come. I worked it as an officer. I'll be honest, as an officer, I did not like that position because I didn't like interacting with the public. I preferred to be, like I said, in the buildings with the inmates. Not like it just preference wise, right? My communication and people skills at that point in time were not up to par as they are now. So sergeant, and then lieutenant, I loved visiting as a lieutenant, man. I sat back, drank my coffee, and kind of just kicked my feet up. I would talk to family members and spouses when they wanted a question asked at the higher level. And, since you have more insight, since you know more policy, right? Because you're researching, you kind of are the one with the answer and the ability to make the decision.
I can completely understand why you didn't like working in visit and with the public at certain points, because there were a lot of times that I didn't even like mixing and mingling with the public or being there myself that were visiting prison, because it's such a highly anxious situation. You could drive across the country. Sometimes I was driving 6 hours each way, didn't know if you were going to get in. And like Adam was saying, to his point, on certain days, there were officers that would tell me, oh, you're not allowed to walk in wearing that. And then turn around and let the girl behind me wearing the same thing in. just because they had something out for us. So there was such this high stress feeling all during processing, all during visit itself. Like I always had to have, where are my hands? Like my, like am I do they think I'm passing something? Do they think I'm doing something? I'm a nervous person to begin with, so maybe it's more me, but I could totally understand why it was difficult for you to interact with that sector of the public, because it's just a very stressful, weird situation to be in.
For sure, for sure. And like I'm out now, so like something I saw is the females were very picky with the female visitors. They were, and my whole thing is that like girls are catty with each other, so it's just nitpicking like, oh, this is too tight, this is too form fitting. And like unless it was like ridiculously out of control, then yeah, of course you're not gonna come in. There's a trailer where you can change your attire. But like I said, as I promoted up the ranks, I just wanted to chill, and I was more reasonable and realistic.
You guys had a trailer? I know.
Yeah,
I heard about these trailers. We didn't have anything. I always would joke that I was going to start a business selling sports bras out of my car, out of my trunk, because the biggest thing that set off the metal detector was underwire in women's bras. But I could tell you this, I always appreciated the officers who I knew had a military background and became COs, because they were always, in the ones that I experienced, they were always by the book typically, but very fair. And I can get down with that. If I know the rules, I'll follow them as long as you're fair. Don't tell me I can't wear something one day and not let me in the next day. Or, I mean, I have story after story after story of things that happen. So follow the rules, be fair, and we can get along. I loved that about them. And it was mostly the military cops.
Well, they, at the academy, they preach to you, be firm, fair, and consistent. Right there, you mentioned consistency. That I could see how that can upset somebody going back and forth. Another thing they taught me at the academy, which stuck like glue, was spirit of the law and letter of the law. Meaning, letter of the law is, let's say you're an officer, you see somebody speeding out in the streets, you pull them over, you give them a speeding ticket. That is the letter of the law. They violated, you give them. Spirit of the law is pretty much you give them a warning. Hey, I saw you go this fast. The speed limit's here. Next time, don't do it again, or I'm going to give you a ticket. That's spirit of the law. And I used to operate. I operate in spirit of the law all the time. That was my get down.
I love that. I got a lot of spirit of the laws. I just never knew what that was.
Yeah, I liked it. It's cool. It gives you a lot of flexibility.
I guess maybe because I was always respectful towards them, but I saw a lot of people not get spirit of the laws. Very much like, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it varies.
So what was the most outrageous thing that you saw out there in the visiting room? Because we have some funny stories of experiences we had, and
there's everything from sexual experiences out there in the visiting room, and unfortunately they will do it when there's children out there with now they get a crime going and we put it on their paperwork. The passing of dope. The wildest thing I saw that was funny was it was a general population yard. So these level 4 inmates, which is the max security, straight gangbangers, straight, Southerners. So it is on point as far as the rules amongst themselves. Well, somebody brought in dope, 2 bindles for an inmate to take back to the yard from the visiting. So they give it to one individual and say, here, put this in your where and take it back to the yard. So he gets it, looks at it, like walks it to the officers, puts it on the podium and says, hey, these guys over here want me to take this back to the yard. So we had to put everybody in cuffs right away because it was not going to end well.
Yeah.
We moved that.
I can't even find words.
Oh, man.
Oh, I got one more that was wild. Like, I'm telling you, the stress towards the end was just too much for me to bear overall.
Yeah.
I was a visiting lieutenant, and man, I can't even believe I'm saying this one. And there was an upset lady. She's screaming she went to her visit. She's coming out. She's talking about an officer hit her child. And I'm like, oh no, like what is going, like you got to, because where I was at, this prison was off the hook with ridiculousness, just weird stuff. It was a weird place, like the Bermuda Triangle type of weird. And I'm like, I got to review the camera. please don't tell me this happened. Like, I don't even want to say nothing until I review the camera and see facts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the little kid, he was not all there. He went to reach for the officer's back because it was nice and shiny, and he was in close proximity. While the officer reacted instinctively and did like a karate chop, and karate chopped his hand out of the way, and the mom flipped out. The kid got scared, and I'm like, oh man. I'm like, told the guy, you're gonna get me kicked out of visiting. I did shortly afterwards get kicked out of visiting, but I always told him, like, messed with him, because of you I got kicked out.
What'd you get kicked out for?
It's politics. It's one of those positions where they move you around, and they'll put their favorites, or if they want to do somewhere else. It's that's how things move.
So what was that last straw? What was it where you were finally just like, you know what, I'm done. I need to get out. I can't do the 28. I'm not going to make it to 50.
Okay. So accumulation of it all, right? I told you I fought the good fight. When I promoted to lieutenant, I fought the good fight. I would rebuttal everything they were telling me through email, through documentation, which is why I feel so comfortable and confident talking about what I talk about. It's all documented and proof, where you see me fighting back. Like, hey, this is not policy, but yeah, you're still asking us to do this. It was COVID 2020, 2021. We got this horrible warden who I equate to Hitler. A dictator. I can no other words, right? And he asked me to be his right-hand man. He asked me to be his right-hand man, which was a public information officer, the one that stands in front of the camera and talks if something happens. It was kind of one of those I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. If I would have said no, they would have retaliated. That was the environment. And so I said yes. I had a daughter. It was banker's hours. I had never had in 15, 14 years. I had never had banker's hours. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna give it my all. That was a mistake. I got to see the whole COVID when they shuffled inmates around and infected everybody. When we were telling them, leave everybody in place, leave everybody in. I mean, we were seeing what was happening, and a lot of inmates died, probably upwards to like 19, 20, and the inmates were physically fighting us because they did not want to get moved into a gym full of COVID, which is understandable. That's the thing. I started like relating and thinking like, what is going on here? This is the upside down world. So it was COVID, and then we had 2 officers get stabbed by a Mexican mafia member, and he was over familiar with a captain on a facility. So they were in cahoots as far as like best friend, buddy type of weird relationship. And that warden liked that captain a lot, favored him. So they swept that incident under the rug.
Oof.
And it made the news. An associate warden got so upset, he wrote an email statewide, went to the press with it. And this is what got me. This is one of the 2 things that got me. When that associate warden blasted email statewide of what was actually happening, the highest level of the department, our headquarters in Sacramento, within 5 minutes wrote a letter rebuttaling, saying, no, we have full support of everybody down there in the leadership position. What that AW is saying is untrue and unsubstantiated. And I'm like, how do you do that in 5 minutes without a thorough investigation? So I saw like, oh man, this goes all the way up.
Yeah.
It was that. And then during the COVID, my wife's sister got COVID. And within a week span, she passed away. She was 41 years old.
Oof.
And then we got the phone call at midnight, and I text the warden, hey sir, I won't be in tomorrow, and I may possibly be in on Monday if everything is situated at home. And he responded was, bring me verification. Bring me verification that she actually passed away.
What?
Yeah, dude. After that it was a wrap. It was a
much
wrap.
for being his right hand.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I couldn't stomach that place anymore. The department.
Oh. Well,
So people ask me like, hey, why didn't you just transfer to another prison? Because there's 33, 34 prisons in California. Because I told you, I just saw the top of the department that oversees everything backing all this corruption up.
And does it follow you? So if you had left and went to a different prison, would your reputation get there first?
Well, I had a good reputation. I I had a good reputation amongst like the troops. The higher ups hated me because I was always backing them to a corner, and the only thing I was doing was being ethical.
And would they pass that word to the other prison, to the other administration before you got?
Damn, I didn't even think about that, but for sure, for sure.
Well, it's interesting. The reason I do think about that is because from Adam's experience, that happens with the inmates. So that's why
Yeah,
I was wondering.
it does. Well, the inmates have a file, like a legitimate file that we're able to see, so that history is gonna. But yeah, you're right. The phone calls would be made, emails would be sent out.
Oh yeah, it's a small community.
It's grimy, yeah.
To be a part of it on either side, whether you're incarcerated or whether you're, working the other side. And it's interesting because the relationships. I have a number of officers who reach out, send me pictures. They're retired now, family. And it's really that experience, and some of that is almost like you said, going to war. There are people that you build relationships through those stressful times, and even though we weren't necessarily on the same side,
Right.
like we have this strange connection at this point. And when they send me stuff about their family, what they're doing, and they want to see what we're doing now, it always strikes me, as interesting because of we spent years together living in that environment, right? And it's different. People outside of that don't understand what that's like, to give your life to that. I'm grateful you made it out.
Mm-hmm.
You got away from all of the politics and all of those things, and you got out at the right time, because I still get phone calls every single day.
Oh man,
and the guys everyone is suffering. Like, there's been no recovery post COVID. The changes that were made, tightening up, locking things down, like that hasn't really eased up. Things haven't come back.
Right.
And it's different. I mean, we went for a couple years, and those individuals who needed to fill your role and other roles don't have your lived experience, so they're not bringing that same level of respect, integrity to the job. And unfortunately, although, life is much better for you, I'm sure it's not nearly as good for those on the inside who have to deal with whoever filled or has attempted to fill your shoes.
Yeah.
Right.
And in addition to that, I'm grateful that you're courageous enough to go online and share your stories, because a lot of people won't, and even a lot can't. So the fact, like, for example, there are so many stories that we can't share yet. We have to wait a little longer. And the fact that you're able to, just a little bit until Adam's off paper, but the fact that you're able to go on there and you're brave enough to share those stories, knowing that there could potentially be backlash, whatever that may be, is so inspiring and encouraging. And I think it helps other people empower themselves to speak up on corruption and to speak up for what's right. Because it's so easy to go along with the crowd. But to speak up for what you see shouldn't be happening is amazing. And thank you for doing that from the perspective of an over a decade prison life.
Thank you. Thank you guys for saying that. Yeah, there was a reason why I resigned. I resigned so that I could be able to speak out. Nobody speaks out because you will get fired. They will make something up frivolous and fire you. Plus the money that they pay you is good, but it wasn't good enough for me, right? Like, you can't put a price tag on my honor. And a lot of people say, hey, Hector, you're courageous that you're doing this, but only thing I can think about is friends that were killed in the military, and they gave the ultimate sacrifice. So to me, what is a job? Like, that's the way I look at it. But yeah, they did it,
Well,
and I just...
we appreciate you. We appreciate you sharing your story with us and for coming on here today. Hopefully we'll get a chance to connect, meet up in person very soon. Where can everybody find you, and what are you doing now?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube, That Prison Guard, and right there I kind of just give life lessons and prisons. I'm looking out for the formerly incarcerated, the incarcerated, the family members, the correctional officers, and I'm exposing the administration up at the top. I'm doing it. I'm fighting multiple battles here on multiple fronts.
Well, we're with you. We support you, and we appreciate you. Thank you for coming on here today. Man, it's been another great episode of Gritability, power of perseverance, overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to attain the life of your dreams. I'm your podcast host, Adam Clausen, the beautiful, ever radiant Ro Clausen, and our guest today, Hector Bravo. We thank you for joining us.
Can't wait for you to come to Vegas. So not only we could do part 2 in person, but also we're going to go to dinner and exchange the craziest stories.
Awesome. Looking forward to it for sure.
Yes, let's do it.
Cool.
We'll see you guys again soon.
Today changes my whole entire life.